Welcome to Huff Post Live. I'm Marc Lamont Hill. Last week, Harry Belafonte set the world on fire with a scathing critique of black celebrities. And in an interview, he said, and I quote, "I think one of the great abuses of this modern time is that we should have such high-profile artists, powerful celebrities, but they have turned their back on social responsibility. That goes for JayZ and Beyonce, for example. Now give me Bruce Springsteen, and now you're talking. I really think he's black." Now, obviously, people were into this article and into this conversation because JayZ and Beyonce were mentioned, but this is bigger than JayZ and Beyonce. The question is, what is the role of black celebrities in contributing to the progress of the black community? Joining me to have this conversation is a black celebrity in our community. We have Isaiah Washington, who's out in LA. We also have Andrea Plaid, who's in Brooklyn. She's associate editor of racialists.com. And we have Jasiri X, who is in Cincinnati right now. He's a hip hop artist from Pittsburgh. He's also an organizer, makes great music. Let me start with you, Andrea. You are critical yourself of artists who don't do enough, right?
Not necessarily. I think in this particular case, I'm not, let me start off with saying I'm not the biggest fan of JayZ or Beyonce, not into their music. But I do think that in this particular case, Mr. Belafonte may have been a little off-putting in what he said. The reality is that JayZ and Beyonce are in their own ways doing activism. Beyonce, especially with her work with AMFAR, with her donating her paycheck from Cadillac Records to a drug rehabilitation center. JayZ himself went out and did work for Obama while he was trying to during his election bid. So in their own ways, they are doing activism. It's not the same activism as Mr. Belafonte is doing and has done, but it's still a form of activism. I mean, all three of them in their own way are bending the arc towards justice. And I think to say that one person is doing it and one person is not may not be very fair.
Jasiri, I want to go to you because you're on the ground. You're an activist. You're also an artist. What's your sense of what activism is supposed to look like? Andrea made a good point. She said, you know, Harry may have a different idea of what activism is.
I mean, yeah, that's a great point. And I think that, you know, as individuals, you know, you have the right to kind of, you know, do what you want to do and what you think is right. But I would agree with Mr. Belafonte in the sense that I don't think that that's enough. And that's my personal opinion. I think that with the state of our community right now, with, you know, unemployment being what it is for our community, higher in the black community, any other community, youth unemployment being at 90%, the violence in our community, the police brutality in our community, I don't think it's enough to just make a donation to a charity or, and I would say that not just for black celebrities, but everybody. I would say that for us, it's not enough to just tithe in our church. I think we all have to take an extra step because, I mean, we see our community really, you know, falling around us. And if all we can do is cut a check and then walk away, I think really all of us are asked to do more now.
Isaiah, are we asking too much, though? I mean, is it your responsibility because you're famous, because you're on TV or on the movie screen, that you have to engage in some kind of social activism?
I think in the context of what is happening with, I'm sort of in the middle here. I guess that's why I've been invited. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of Mr. Belafonte. I privately, quietly have been trying to walk in his shoes, taking more of a global approach, trying to get a dialogue happening between African Americans and the lovely continent of Africa. I believe I'm going in a different direction, thinking that we can probably address a lot of these ills if we can actually find a resolution on how we can get access to the resources that are available to the world, other than the Chinese community, to actually address a lot of these things. Well, we don't have to look to the Bill Cosbys, the Oprah Winfreys, the Michael Jordans, or the JayZs or the Beyoncés as the lightning rods of examples of what they're not doing with their money. I can also say that, me personally, that activism is not a lucrative business. In Hollywood, if you want to clear a room, start talking about changing something. I've always experienced that. I've always known, and even when I was working for one of the most powerful organizations in this town, I was always queried about my activism in Africa, queried about my visits to the Congressional Black Caucus. I've even had people ask me, Isaiah, what are you doing? Are you trying to run for president? So, you know, being political in Hollywood is not really looked upon as something positive. In fact, Jesse Jackson himself, I remember years back, Chi McBride did a scathing piece where he was playing like a butler to Abraham Lincoln many years ago, and people were picketing out on Melrose, Paramount Pictures. And I was just, although I love Chi McBride, I consider him a colleague and a friend, I went out to picket. And I saw Jesse Jackson there, and he looked at me and said, what are you doing out here? You need to go home.
He almost, right.
Wow.
That's interesting. And see, I guess that's my point. And Andrea, what Isaiah's speaking to is this idea partly that not only do celebrities not want to be public, it might actually be difficult to be public. It might actually undermine the very legitimacy and status that gets you access to the public in the first place. If I'm so busy selling stuff in terms of my activism or my political line, and people don't want to see me in the movies anymore, then I lose the power that I have. What do you say to that?
I think I feel several ways about that. I understand the need to sustain yourself in the work that you love to do. That's why actors do what they do. That's why anyone who does creative work do what they do. Right. I completely agree with that. And again, I have to go back to this idea that you have to be active in the way that you think is best. I totally understand what Jasiri is saying about you have to do a little bit more. But what if you are a disabled person? What if you are a transgender person where it may be dangerous or difficult to do the work that you want to do because it means death? Well,
but Andrew, what if it doesn't mean that? Andrew, no, let me ask you a question. What if it doesn't mean that?
Let me finish.
Oh, go ahead.
Mark, let me finish. So what I'm saying is some things may be too dangerous. It may be materially dangerous. It may be socially dangerous to do certain kinds of work. Doesn't mean that therefore they shouldn't do it or the person is any less black or any less of an activist. It's just that they form different ways of doing their kinds of activism. So it may be quietly giving money to the church. It also may be the person who is out building the church. It may be the person who is going from the pulpit out into the streets and protesting a social injustice. So there are many ways. The way I'm going to say it is like this. There are 50 plus shades of being of black social activism. And I don't think there needs to be shade thrown on how people want to do it.
But what if you go ahead, Jasiri.
I would say that, you know, number one, I mean, we're here today. I mean, we can directly attribute our success in each of our individual fields from people that put their lives on the line to change this world, and many who died, you know, in the act of changing that world. And so to me, we owe them in a sense, because many of us wouldn't have the success that we have now for that. Plus, you see people like Angelina Jolie, Bono. I mean, you see these very active celebrities, and you know they're still getting paid to do movies. They're still getting paid to make music.
But do black people have that luxury? But Jasiri, do black people have that luxury? I mean, it's one thing for Angelina to go around telling us to adopt, you know, Negro babies. It's one thing for, you know, it's one thing for George Clooney or Bono to tell us about the environment. It's a whole other thing for what's his name from you know, Mr. from Color Purple, from
Danny Glover.
Thank you for Danny Glover to go out in the world and talk about imperialism, or to talk about white supremacy, or to talk about environmental injustices. I mean, the stakes are higher, aren't they?
I think that what you guys are missing too. I think the bigger picture here is that no one is talking about Alfre Woodard. No one's talking about Blair Underwood, Danny Glover, who's been on the front lines forever.
Right.
The problem I have with this whole story is only two articles that I've seen on it. One from Trisha Rose, The Guardian, and the Huffington Post. I think that's the fundamental issue right there, is that the mainstream media doesn't care about our issues. Right. I've only seen two articles. So right here, I'm living in a town in the belly of the beast, where I've made history getting my citizenship with an African nation, something that W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey died trying to do. Malcolm X, Adam Clayton Powell. Now, you have a lot of Ralph Bunche-esque individuals, a lot of Thurgood Marshall-esque individuals. You have a lot of President Obama's. But you also have a lot of Richard Roundtrees and a lot of Harry Belafontes, people that will get on the front line and risk themselves. It's really, I think, it's about the DNA. It's like if you were a person that was about revolution and evolution 500 years ago, like my ancestor with Joseph Sankey, Sigmund Pae, who turned the Amistad around, then that's who you're going to be today. It doesn't matter whether you have money or not. It's whether you have the will.
Exactly.
And it seems to me,
I would agree. And I would say, Danny Glover, one of the things he did to make a movie about Toussaint Louverture, he went to and raised funds from Chavez in Venezuela to make that movie himself. So I think that that's another aspect of what we need to do is really, if we're in a position where somebody is telling us what we can and cannot do, or if we have or want or have the will or love to do some activism, but we're afraid of how it might look, we really have to then say, well, what type of control is over, these systems where we can't do what we want to do, and we really have to begin to break down these systems.
Well, if you're working for a corporation, you can't say certain things. I mean, you can't have a certain behavior. Even what you say is considered polarizing or too political. I've even was asked that, be careful, Isaiah, you're becoming too political.
But hold on 1 second, because Isaiah, but that speaks to another point, right? Because then there becomes this tension between saying, I do my undercover stuff, I do my secret giving, I do my secret philanthropy, and people saying, I'm going to push back against the machine and try and change the machine itself. Andrea says we shouldn't throw shade at people for their particular form of giving, but the pushback might be, Andrea, well, what happens if the thing we actually need from the person is their voice, not just their money, but their voice? I mean, isn't it different if a celebrity doesn't just donate to a fund, but actually gets on public airwaves and says, this is wrong? When Kanye West stands up and says, George Bush doesn't care about black people, that might have a more profound impact on the public conversation than him giving $5 million. The question is, who's willing to do that?
Well, that's a pathology that you have to, is inherent with this business. If you come in purely, I became an actor because I'm a Pan-Africanist. I became an actor because I want to change hair issues. I want to wear, locks and show the people that we have, what does your intellect have to do with your hair? Everyone doesn't come to Hollywood or come into the music business to change anything. They come because they've been little girls and little boys who won a Grammy, who won an Oscar, who won a Tony Award. And, you can't, I agree with Andrea, you can't discount them because they simply just want to be successful coming from whatever their circumstances are. However, Sirius X, I also agree with you, there has to be a culture and a new voice that says, like Andrea is saying, is what kinds of activism are we going to be talking about? Because certainly right now the world is not talking about Harry Belafonte and JayZ. They're just not. They're not interested. So what are we? How are we going to shape this narrative to talk about the issues of Farrakhan being in his 5th week in the streets of Chicago and their silence on Capitol Hill? How are we? It's about us. What are we doing to shape this narrative about our own activism in our own community, and more importantly, our own activism globally? Why does Coney 2012 have more of a voice than our own African diaspora to talk about what's happening in the Congo and all the atrocities?
Andrea.
That's us. That's us.
Yes.
Jump on, you got to elbow your way in this thing. What do you say, though? I mean, are you really willing to accept 50 shades of activism? Because some stuff to me sounds shady. Like, look, I'll slip and give you $1 million, but I ain't going to say nothing about it in public.
You know what? Let me say it like this. Let's bring it back to JayZ. Yes, he has done work with Obama's campaign. At the same time, the work that he's doing in Brooklyn, as far as being associated with the Brooklyn Nets, is seen with a very skeptical eye because it is seen as a form of further gentrifying Brooklyn. So people come to activism with, so yes, I think that is shady, but that doesn't mean, therefore, I'm going to discount what JayZ is doing, what he did with Obama. Again, everybody's not going to be activists in the same way. You're going to have people who can't go out and march. But that doesn't mean that they are not passionate. Doesn't mean that they're not.
What do you mean by can't? What do you mean by can't?
What if they're physically disabled, Mark? What if they cannot walk the streets?
But I'm talking about celebrities.
Hold on.
But that's not. Hold on. I got to pause you for a minute because I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about celebrities.
Come on.
No, but if you're saying we need to talk about activism, how people are going to be active, we need to talk about people who are physically able and people who aren't physically able
Well,
to do that kind of work.
But that's not what I'm talking. I agree with you. If somebody's in a wheelchair, they shouldn't. I shouldn't expect it, or maybe we shouldn't have the same expectation. People are able in different ways. I agree with that.
That's what I'm talking about.
Hold on, let me finish the point. Let me finish. What I'm saying is though, what about people who don't do it because they say it will hurt my career, it will hurt my Q rating, it will hurt my bottom line. That's all I'm talking about. What do we say to those people?
And it will. I remember Don Cheadle, another colleague of mine. He did very well in Hotel Rwanda. We were golfing at a Tiger Woods event, and he may not agree with me sharing this, but he said to me, he says, "Wow, I never thought that my work in Darfur would hurt my ability to do comedies and other dramas because now I'm pigeonholed as the
activist actor,
the activist angry black man that's trying to save Africa. So you don't need us. Go to Africa." And there's always that undercurrent sentiment there is that if you don't like what we're doing in this country, then take your keister back to Africa. Which is exactly
or anywhere or wherever you come from.
And I'll say this, Mark, the first song that I really actually made that got national attention was a song called Free to Gina 6. And in that song, I actually put a call out. I said, call Weezy, call Baby, call BG, call Juvenile, Manny Fresh, call Master P, because I saw, what was happening with these young men in Gina, Louisiana, these young men who support these rappers, who make these rappers hot, but I didn't hear anything from any of these artists in Louisiana even speaking out to say that they should get justice. And so I do think that, and that's why I'm glad, Mr. Belafonte, who, personally has mentored me, personally has put his own money up to take me around the country, to introduce me to different people and different things, to share with me what the successes and failures of the civil rights movement. We have to push back. And even if we start this conversation, and hopefully it will raise some type of consciousness in the mind of JayZ and Beyonce and others to say that, yeah, you might have gave, to this charity or that charity, but we got to do more. And like he said about Minister Farrakhan personally going out in the street, we really need to see people out in the street because we're losing young people daily. And there's another question about the rampant materialism a lot of these artists project and how that oftentimes is also contributing to what's happening in our community.
Let me change gears. We have Cassie. We have a from someone in the green room who weighed in on this. And again, I encourage you all to go to the resource well, read the articles that sparked this conversation, and also look at the conversation that's going on in the chat room or in the green room because it's much smarter than anything I could offer. Join in, weigh in. Cassie60 says that some of the people who we think are having these, who we want to be activists, don't have the mental acumen to do it. In other words, you don't want all these people being activists. And I've had that experience. I've organized at political rallies, and I've given the microphone to a rapper, so they could talk about the prison industrial complex or environmental abuse. And after about 30 seconds, I'm like, yeah, I probably should have just took a donation from them because they're not really helping the cause.
See?
I'm just saying that. Go ahead, Angie. I know you think you're right now, so I'm gonna let you go. What were you about to say?
You agree with me. That's all I have to say.
Yeah,
but no, I mean, everybody, it's not about mental acumen. Everybody may not be as well-read, well-spoken, but some people may be able to speak from their perspective and to different audiences. Again, with celebrities, everybody doesn't have that same background like a Harry Belafonte, who I love, respect, and without the work that he has done, I wouldn't be here talking right now. There are people who, you just don't want to hear from, but they can do things in other ways, and that's okay too. I'm not going to fault Beyonce for the work that because it's philanthropy. What she's doing is a form of philanthropy.
Right. It's not activism. It's philanthropy.
But in her mind, it's a form of activism. At the same time, I can look at Beyonce and that whole blackface spread that she did for the L'Officiel magazine in 2011. Kind of go, what were you thinking? Where was your head at when you did that?
It's very clear what she's thinking. I mean, when I always go on my speaking engagements, people always ask me, Angelina, not to cut you off, but Angelina Jolie, they would always say, who's more African? And I always say Angelina Jolie. Look at what she's doing around the world. Look at the children. If you look at Beyonce, I mean, she's getting, blonder and blonder, which is a personal prerogative. But when you're talking about an aesthetic of people that look like you, look like me, when they're looking at these people in these powerful positions, I mean, the power of the image is very, very real. It's very, very serious. What the media gets on and what it doesn't get, supports. It's very, very real. Indifference is the major killer here. It's not that we're sitting here talking about this. It's the fact that there's certain things you just don't know. So when you do see a Beyonce out there and the hair flowing like Tina Turner, then one thing is going like, okay, I want to aspire to that. But then when you see Angelina Jolie, so where do I see you? Where are you? Where is your face in this activism in terms of the media? Because you look like the majority of the population in the world. Well, we don't see your face, Andrea. We don't see your image. So we also have to take a look at that as well. It's like looking at the rest of the world. It's like, why should we be interested in this cultural issue, these societal ills, when it appears that everyone that looks like you or look like me doesn't have an image, or doesn't have a platform or a voice?
I mean, and that's an important point. When JayZ or Beyonce, since they're the ones who got named by Harry Belafonte, when they go and write $1 million check, I mean, we can't ignore the significance of that. And they don't necessarily always call the paparazzi or do a press release. They just give the money. And Beyonce's camp actually just released a statement in response to Mr. Belafonte, an abbreviated list of all the philanthropic efforts she's done. They're giving their money, they're giving their time, they're making a commitment. I think Harry Belafonte, though, has a different point that he's making, which is what Isaiah just said, which is that there's something to be said about seeing our celebrities in full public view advocating for a cause, because it doesn't just add attention to the cause, it also motivates another generation of activists.
Yes.
Seeing, and Sister Professor who just weighed in and said the same thing. She said, look at that tradition of Lorraine Hansberry, of James Baldwin, of Harry Belafonte. There's a whole generation of black celebrities who committed themselves to a cause. So that motivated the next generation of activists. So isn't there some responsibility to do that? Too. I mean, Jasiri.
Right, and I think what happens when you look at artists and athletes, and like I said, I mean, you see somebody that really spend their time in front of the cameras. You see individuals that really, spend their time really talking. And so oftentimes it's like you're already in front of the camera, you're already entertaining hundreds of thousands of people. How hard would it to say, to talk about whether it's justice for Trayvon Martin, whether it's, the epidemic of police brutality that's happening, or stop and frisk. Like that doesn't even take but maybe 30 seconds on the mic to speak about. I mean, JayZ, Bloomberg, what I'm saying? Y'all are boys. I mean, you can't, speak to that. And I think you've seen individuals like a Russell Simmons who has been able to, speak to some of these issues, but also, handle his business. And so I think you can do both. And I think that's where we get disappointed because, I'm a fan of JayZ as an artist, a fan of Beyonce as an artist, and, wish them the utmost success, sell 1 billion albums as far as I'm concerned. But when you don't even take that opportunity to just say 2 or 3 words on an experience we know you have. We know JayZ and Beyonce have personally dealt with racism and personally dealt with these issues, just being black people in America. Say something to them. You know what I'm saying? I mean, at what point do you stop being afraid?
Well, I think that Beyonce has said something. I think she has done some work with young women and pregnancy and safer sex. So we have to put that out there. Maybe she didn't do it in this wide public way, but she has spoken to people directly and used her celebrity in that fashion in a quieter way, but she's still done it. So let's kind of put that there as well.
But I think
now do we, thank you. Now, do we therefore say that should she be doing more? Sure, but we can all be doing more as well.
Exactly, I agree.
And so I kind of feel like I don't want to use these celebrities as substitute messiahs, because I think sometimes there tends to be this, not a way that I think sometimes we as progressive people, progressive black people, we want to, or people who are looking for leadership as far as dealing with progressive issues, as far as social issues. And we want to have that person who's going to lead us. And it's like, no, we need to lead ourselves. Right. We can be that change that we want to see, in other words, to use a cliched word, to use a cliched phrase. But
Gandhi said that. That's not cliche.
Well, but so many people use it. That's what I'm saying, because everybody is like, I love Gandhi too.
They're using it incorrectly. It's like, be the change you wish to see in the world.
Well, be it as it may, Mr. Washington. But the point is that we don't necessarily need to have I mean, it's great if they say it, but then again, we can all take ourselves out and do similar things ourselves.
Yeah, no, but I think there's a difference. I think there's a difference between blame and responsibility. I think it will be a problem to blame celebrities for the work that's not being done. But that doesn't ignore the fact that they do have a responsibility to do the work because they've been given the most. And when we look at every moment in history, whether it was the March on Washington, yeah, we didn't expect Harry Belafonte to lead the March on Washington, but he certainly helped to fund the March on Washington, right?
Right, but so he was in the bag.
Yeah, no, and that's what I'm saying. So the giving part, I think, is important.
NABJ has a responsibility to address this, man. The NABJ, Roland Martin, Soledad O'Brien, the NABJ.org has a big responsibility to get this message out. And I got to tell you, man, I haven't seen NABJ get behind a whole lot of things. Now, I may be taking a hit on you and my good colleague, Roland Martin, but there's a lot of us that are, well, you are accepting certain paychecks, Keith Boykin, everybody's at CNN. There's a lot of things that you just don't have that voice. You just don't have the opportunity to say it. The only one thing I've seen is, you're going to get into it, you get into it on Twitter.
No, that's exactly. That's a good point. And that speaks to another thing, because it's not just black celebrities. The point is, what do the powerful have as a responsibility? Because when you look at black scholars, the argument has been that they don't engage in activism enough, whether it's black celebrities, black journalists. The question is always, can you do more? And I think the answer is yes, we can always do more, but I want to make sure we're not putting too much pressure on celebrities, but also not letting letting them off the hook.
Exactly.
I don't think we're looking, I know personally, I don't think we're looking for these celebrities to be like a messiah or a leader, but it's like your influence is valuable. If it wasn't valuable, you wouldn't be getting paid $1 million of record contracts. Revlon or Coca-Cola or Budweiser, wouldn't be, utilizing your voice and your music for these campaigns. And so if you're, making, all of this money because of your influence, why not just take a few moments to use some of your influence to help these issues that people are struggling with on a daily basis, especially in a condition where, they just talked about how the economy is at its weakest recovery since World War II. That obviously impacts people of color more, especially black people. And so if we don't take some time to even speak to that issue, but then anytime we speak, it's all about, how much money you have. At some point, and that's all I ask. Like I said, you don't got to lead me. You don't got turn your whole career around and make a whole album, JayZ in Africa, whatever it might be called.
That sounds like a blaxploitation movie. JayZ in Africa, that sounds like a blaxploitation movie or something, man, one of the most 70s flicks. But thank you all. I got to pause y'all, but thank you all for this conversation. It never actually ends, though, so you all can stay in the chat, in the green room, chatting with the people in the Huff Post community. I want you all to stay involved in this conversation as well. Let us know what you think the responsibility socially is of black celebrities is. Also, let us know what you think about the resource well. Make sure you check out the statistics, the articles that sparked all of this. The conversation never stops on Huff Post Live.